Hello and welcome to more history stuff. This is the second of my not terribly serious series of reviews of battle scenes in movies. Last time I did the first part of a review of the Battle of Stirling in Braveheart. The English cavalry had just been butchered by William Wallace and his spearmen, their big long pointy sticks. And I made a few comments about that and how the way the battle was depicted was really not much like the reality. And this is the second part in which the English infantry get thrown in to try and rescue the situation. So hopefully the sound and the general audio and video quality is better on this one. So let's watch a bit of fighting and killing. Okay, I'll stop it there for a moment. Here you have the contrast between the English and the Scots. The English are all wearing a very peculiar form of armour. They've got sort of big cardboard things on their sleeves and very strange looking helmets and orange tunics and things. The Scots, of course, are all wearing some just outlandish outfits. It's like a mixture between 18th century Highland dress and the Sex Pistols. I haven't actually watched this film for a while, and obviously everyone knows it's very inaccurate and all the rest of it. But it's only when you watch it again that you realise just how absurd it is. I mean, I don't know what Wallace and his men are supposed to be looking like here. In reality, of course, they wouldn't have looked much different to the English infantry. They would have all worn pretty much the same sort of armour, carried the same kind of weapons. But of course this is Hollywood and it's all for effect, so let's carry on with the fighting. Another point to make is that they've been running for quite some time now. That's a lot of running. And they're having to run across a great big field, and you'd have thought that by the time they actually met each other, they'd all be absolutely exhausted. Just something else that struck me. I think I'd be absolutely knackered by now, and I'd probably be hanging around at the back anyway, trying not to get hurt. But here we go. Okay, so obviously it's all very gory and horrible. One thing I noticed is that the English soldiers, despite wearing lots of armour and being very well armed, they don't seem to be very good at fighting. They're all killed quite easily, whereas the Scots are these big sort of macho alpha male heroic types who, you know, they can take down 3 Englishmen by just waving their sword at them. Obviously the film is about William Wallace and it's supposed to have this sort of heroic quality about it. But when you watch it, it is slightly odd. It's like, well, how did the English manage to conquer Scotland in the first place if they're so incredibly bad at fighting? Historically, the English army by this point, Edward I's soldiers and his knights and his men-at-arms, they were no pushovers. They'd been fighting for over 20 years, or 30 years if you count the civil wars in England, and there were some very tough veterans among the ranks. And I don't think they would have had much trouble with Mel Gibson's rabble of punks in kilts and sporrans and rubber swords or whatever they're supposed to be wielding. Anyway, let's get on with it. Notice how the English soldiers attack Mel Gibson one at a time. This always happens with heroes. They only ever get attacked one at a time. You'd think that the bad guys would figure out to attack him like all at the same time, but they don't. Oh, the nasty old English commander is running away. All his men are being killed. Poor old Lord Bottoms, foiled again. Those are supposed to be Welsh archers, of course, so the Welsh are actually being butchered by the Scots here. Yeah. Yeah. Blah blah blah. Yeah. Stop it. Yeah, this is actually quite boring, isn't it? It got very good reviews at the time, these battle scenes, because they were supposed to be realistic. You know, they're very violent, very gory, shot very close up, and there's sort of blood and limbs flying all over the place, and that's supposed to be realistic. Like this is what a medieval battle really was like. Well, I don't think it is really. I can't imagine that many medieval commanders would have just thrown their men at the enemy, and that the other commander would have done the same thing, and they have a great big fight in the middle of the field. Most battles of this era that I've read about didn't really work like that. And what usually happened was that one side would take up a defensive position, and then the other side would have to try and break it down somehow. I mean, at Stirling Bridge, of course, there was a bridge in the way. That's why the Scots won. If there had been no bridge and the battle had been fought on an open plain, well, the English heavy cavalry would have ridden straight over Wallace's army. He didn't use the Schiltron at this battle, and as far as we know, he and his allies haven't thought of it yet. Proper English heavy cavalry knights, men-at-arms of this period would not have been repelled by some men holding up pointy sticks that they just cut from a local forest. And they'd have just ridden straight over their heads. Yeah, I thought this would be more interesting than it is. It's a slightly sinister film, Braveheart, in some ways. The problems with it go beyond historical accuracy. I mean, that's the usual criticism, that it's very inaccurate, and it is. But there's something else going on there, something quite unpleasant. The Scots are portrayed as these sort of supermen, very macho, very alpha male, very sort of hetero in this kind of traditional rugged frontierman kind of way. And I think that's supposed to appeal to an American audience and a popular audience, and their sort of notion of big, manly, sort of almost John Wayne type fighting men. Whereas the English are all they're all slightly deviant. They're either perverts or rapists or latent homosexuals, of course, because obviously homosexuals are all cowardly and very bad at fighting. That's the impression that a film like this seeks to get across. Anyway. You've got that very uncomfortable scene later on, which is played for laughs, really, even though the writers denied it, in which the villain Longshanks throws his son's gay lover out of the window. And although when you first watch that, it's quite entertaining, you then realise, well, why was I entertained by that? Why did I find it funny that a gay man was murdered and thrown out of a window? And the way the scene is shot, it is definitely played for laughs. That's the impression that the makers of the film wanted to give. I just don't accept any other interpretation. I just think that's a lie. And this battle scene, I mean, what is it exactly? What are we watching? It's got nothing to do with the real battle, the specific Battle of Stirling Bridge. There's no reality to that. It doesn't really project any kind of realistic impression of medieval warfare. This isn't how battle works, so far as we know. Nobody wore costumes like this, nobody wielded weapons like this. I mean, the Scots are wielding some sort of Conan the Barbarian type things, big rubber hammers and axes. So what is it? What are we being shown here? It's a sort of strange fantasy version of what the makers of this film imagined medieval warfare and a medieval battle was like. And that's all it is, really. It's a very peculiar fantasy. And yeah, I got about halfway through the video and I must admit, I just thought, well, this is really boring. There's no tension really on display, because you know that Wallace and his merry men are going to win, and that they're going to slaughter like 20 foolish Englishmen between them, and then the cavalry will ride over the hill and the battle will be over, and it'll all be very rousing. The music will strike up and everyone will start screaming and chanting Wallace, Wallace. Yeah, and it's kind of dull, not very good really. Yeah, I'm kind of strangely disappointed feeling after watching this battle scene again after so many years. It's impressive, the scale of it is impressive, the number of extras they put onto screen, and I suppose how it was filmed, but otherwise it's all a bit silly. And it's not only silly is fine, I like silly, but it's kind of boring, and when you think about it, just a little bit, not too much. You don't have to think about it too much. It all gets a bit offensive and weird. So, oh well. Even though I've been very negative, I hope you enjoyed this video in some way. I'm afraid I'm not going to watch the battle to the end because I know what happens. You all know what happens, and yeah, it's really quite boring, isn't it? So. If I do another of these reaction videos, I'll try and find something more interesting, perhaps a different film. There must be lots of much better war films out there with much more interesting battle scenes. So that's it for now. Hopefully this worked better than the last video, and I'll hopefully speak to you again later.